Welcome back to Behind the Genius, the place where history is more than just dates and names. It's where we uncover the strange, the chilling, and the stories the world wished we'd forget. Today, we travel back to 1849. Kentucky was still frontierland in many ways, rolling hills, wooden cabins, and small farming villages cut off from the wider world. Life was hard, food was scarce, and survival meant depending on the land. But in one forgotten town, there was a girl, no older than 12, who formed a bond with the crows that gathered on the rooftops and fence posts. At first it seemed harmless. Villagers would smile as she scattered seeds and scraps, the birds cawing happily in return. But within months those crows no longer left. They multiplied. They circled the skies like a black storm cloud, watching, waiting. And by the end of the year, when travelers passed through the village, they found no living soul. Only skeletons picked clean, roofs caved under the weight of wings, and a silence broken only by the endless sound of crows. This is the story of the girl who fed the crows, and the village that vanished under beaks and bones. Welcome back to Behind the Genius, the place where history is more than just dates and names. It's where we uncover the strange, the chilling, and the stories the world wished we'd forget. Today, we travel back to 1849. Kentucky was still frontier land in many ways, rolling hills, wooden cabins, and small farming villages cut off from the wider world. Life was hard, food was scarce, and survival meant depending on the land. But in one forgotten town, there was a girl, no older than 12, who formed a bond with the crows that gathered on the rooftops and fence posts. At first it seemed harmless. Villagers would smile as she scattered seeds and scraps, the birds cawing happily in return. But within months those crows no longer left. They multiplied. They circled the skies like a black storm cloud, watching, waiting. And by the end of the year, when travelers passed through the village, they found no living soul. Only skeletons picked clean, roofs caved under the weight of wings, and a silence broken only by the endless sound of crows. This is the story of the girl who fed the crows and the village that vanished under beaks and bones. If this story unsettled you, don't forget to subscribe to Behind the Genius. Every subscription motivates me to keep digging, to keep uncovering the files and tales that history tried to erase. Your support is the reason I upload more of these chilling investigations. So hit that like button, share this with someone who loves the shadows of history, and subscribe if you haven't already, because the next story might just be darker than this one. The year was 1849, and Kentucky was still a place of half-wild frontier, where the woods pressed close to the edges of the fields and the rivers carried secrets with their currents. Among the ridges and valleys of Bourbon County, travelers spoke of a place few dared to stop. Ashford Hollow, a settlement no bigger than 24 families, tucked so deep into the hills it was as though the world itself had forgotten it. The Hollow had always been quiet, though never peaceful. Neighbors whispered of strange silences that fell without reason, of animals gone missing in the night, of crops failing while the soil looked rich enough to swallow the world. But it wasn't until the arrival of one child that the whispers began to take form, that the villagers found themselves bound together by a fear they could not explain. Her name was Miriam Blackwood, and she was only 12 years old when the story began. Miriam had been orphaned that past winter. Her parents, farmers who lived on the farthest edge of the hollow, were found frozen in their cabin after the great storm of January. By spring thaw, Miriam was taken in by her aunt, Edith Harrow, a severe woman with gray eyes and a sharp tongue, who already had 6 mouths to feed and little patience for another. The girl was strange, the neighbors said, too quiet, too watchful. She was never seen playing with the other children. Instead, she wandered the fields alone, her bare feet black with dust, her pale hands clasped behind her back. And always, the crows followed her. At first, it was only 1 or 2. Black shapes perching on the fence posts as she passed, cocking their heads as though listening. Then there were more, 5, 10, a dozen. Within weeks, an entire murder trailed her wherever she went, swooping low when she laughed softly, circling above her when she lifted her arms to the sky. Villagers watched from their windows as Miriam scattered crumbs and scraps of bread into the dirt road, the birds descending like a black storm, their wings slapping against one another as they fought for the food. The sight was strange, yes, but it brought smiles at first. The preacher joked that Miriam was the Lord's little shepherdess, sent with his ravens for company. Children laughed and clapped, though their mothers tugged them away quickly, muttering about bad omens. But as spring bled into summer, those laughs began to fade. The crows did not leave. By June, there were hundreds. They covered rooftops and fence rails, their claws scraping wood into splinters. They nested in the eaves of barns, their droppings thick as snow along the ground. When the villagers woke, it was to the sound of wings beating against shutters, of caws so loud they shook the glass. The sky above Ashford Hollow grew darker by the day. From a distance, travelers described the place as though a storm cloud sat always over the houses, yet the rain never fell. At first, the villagers tried to ignore it. Life in Ashford Hollow had never been easy, and the people were used to enduring hardship with gritted teeth. But soon, the presence of the crows began to press on them like a sickness. The chickens refused to lay. Sheep went missing from the fields, their bones discovered days later picked clean. When the men planted corn, the shoots barely broke the soil before the black swarm descended, tearing the stalks into shreds. And always, at the center of it all, was Miriam. It was the blacksmith who first claimed he saw her speaking to them. Late one evening, as the sun bled red across the hills, he walked past the meadow where Miriam often wandered. There, among the tall grass, he saw her crouched low, her pale hands cupped to her lips. Around her, hundreds of crows circled in perfect silence. She was not scattering food this time. She was humming. The sound was faint at first, a low vibration, almost too quiet to be human, and yet the birds responded. They tilted their heads, they stepped closer. They let out low, throaty croaks as though answering her. The blacksmith told the others at the tavern, his face pale as he described it. She weren't speaking English. She weren't speaking nothing I knew. It was more like the sound a kettle makes before it screams. The men laughed nervously. But that night, they barred their doors more tightly than usual. By midsummer, the hollow was suffocating. Crows lined every roof. They clustered so thick along the church steeple that the cross bent under their weight. Their eyes glowed like beads of ink in the twilight, and wherever a villager walked, they felt those eyes on them, watching, measuring, waiting. Food became scarce. Gardens stripped bare, smokehouses raided. When the villagers tried to drive the birds away, banging pots, waving rifles, lighting pitch fires, the crows scattered into the trees, only to return hours later in greater numbers. Mothers began to whisper that Miriam was the cause, that she had called them somehow, and they could not be sent away while she remained. The preacher urged patience. "She is but a child," he said from the pulpit, though his own voice shook. "The Lord tests us, and we must endure." But his words carried little weight when the villagers went home to empty cupboards and fields black with wings. Even her aunt could not deny it. Edith confessed in hushed tones that Miriam left the house at night with baskets of scraps, slipping out the door as the birds stirred on the rooftops. "She feeds them more than she feeds herself," Edith whispered, "and when she comes back, her eyes shine like theirs." The breaking point came in August. A farmer named Thomas Keene caught Miriam near his field one evening. His crops, the only ones left standing in the hollow, were ringed by dozens of black shapes, waiting. When he saw the girl scatter something, "Into the soil," he snapped. He struck her arm, shouting for her to leave, calling her a curse, a plague on them all. Miriam said nothing. She only lifted her eyes to him, dark, wide, unblinking, and smiled faintly. Then she turned and the crows followed. The next morning, Thomas Keene was found in the road, or what was left of him. His eyes were gone, his lips torn, his flesh stripped in ragged patches that exposed the bone beneath. His wife swore she heard caws all through the night, circling above their roof, never stopping, never sleeping. And in the distance, Miriam was seen again, walking barefoot down the road, her hair tangled, her dress stained with dust. Behind her, the crows swarmed like a living shadow. From that moment on, the hollow was no longer a village, but a prison. No letters left. No wagons traveled out, no songs were sung in the church. Only the endless sound of wings, cawing, scratching, tearing. Those who tried to leave never made it far. A merchant who attempted the road to Lexington was found slumped against his wagon, his throat torn open, his horse half-eaten. Others who fled into the hills were simply never seen again. By October, the village was half-starved, its houses black with feathers, its wells choked with bones. And Miriam, she was everywhere, standing in the fields at dawn, humming softly as the crows circled, wandering the dirt road at dusk, 1,000 eyes glinting above her. Sometimes she vanished for days, only to reappear with more birds than before, her skin pale, her lips faintly blue, as though she no longer belonged to the hollow at all. It was said that by winter she no longer ate, that she no longer slept, that she belonged only to the crows, and that they, in turn, belonged only to her. The death of Thomas Keene broke something in Ashford Hollow. Until then, fear had been a shadow in the corners of every home, a rumor whispered behind closed shutters. But now fear had a body, bloodied and torn, laid out on the table of the church, where the women had tried to sew his remains into some recognizable shape. The preacher stood over the corpse with his Bible open, though the words trembled in his throat, drowned by the faint scratching of claws on the windowsills outside. The crows had gathered at the church as though mocking the service, tapping their beaks against the glass, until each prayer seemed a futile thing. No one said Miriam's name aloud, but her presence was everywhere. Men avoided the road where she was seen walking barefoot. Mothers pulled their children back if the girl passed too close. Even her Aunt Edith, who had once spoken sharply in Miriam's defense, now kept her distance. At night, she barred her door and muttered prayers in the dark, praying that the child under her roof would simply disappear. But Miriam did not vanish. If anything, she grew bolder. By September, she could be found at the edge of the cemetery, humming her strange kettle song as the crows perched on the gravestones around her. Some claimed they saw her place her hands on the stones themselves, whispering into the earth. Others swore they saw the ground shiver faintly beneath her touch. Whether those tales were truth or terror, the villagers did not ask. No one dared. Food dwindled. Every attempt to hunt was thwarted by the crows, who followed hunters into the woods and burst into flurries of wings that scattered the deer and frightened the rabbits. Even fishing was impossible. The birds swooped onto the rivers, tearing at the lines, snatching the catch before it reached a basket. Hunger made the villagers lean and sharp-eyed, and whispers turned to curses. Still, Miriam fed the crows. One evening, a farmer's wife woke to find her smokehouse raided. When she followed the trail of scraps, she saw Miriam at the tree line, scattering bits of salted pork into the grass. The birds tore at it with frenzied hunger, feathers flying as they devoured what little remained. The wife screamed at her, threw a stone, but Miriam only turned, calm as the grave, and smiled that faint smile that seemed less human with each passing week. The next morning, the farmer's wife was gone. Her body was not found, though her bonnet lay in the dirt outside her door, black feathers caught in its ribbon. The preacher tried to keep order. He gathered the villagers in the church each Sunday, though the benches grew emptier with every passing week. He thundered about faith, about resisting temptation, about driving out the devil's work, but each time he spoke, the crows grew louder, their caws rattling the rafters, forcing his words to climb higher and higher, until he was nearly shrieking. Scripture. Some said it was the girl who made them louder, that she sat outside the church, barefoot on the steps, her lips moving in silent echo to the preacher's words. And when the congregation left, she was always there, watching. It was during one such service that Edith Harrow broke. In front of the whole hollow she stood and shouted, "She is not my blood, she is not my kin, she brings death wherever she walks." Her voice cracked, and tears streaked her face. "If we do not drive her out, none of us will live through winter." The silence that followed was broken not by man, but by the flutter of wings. A crow swooped through a crack in the church roof and landed on the pulpit beside the Bible. It tilted its head, black eyes shining in the dim light, and gave a single rasping caw. The villagers scattered in terror. That night, the first meeting was held in secret. A dozen men crowded into the blacksmith's barn, the air thick with smoke and sweat and fear. They spoke in hushed tones, glancing at the windows where shadows moved against the glass. The blacksmith himself argued to act quickly, to send Miriam into the woods and let the birds follow. Others hesitated, crossing themselves as they whispered about the wrath of God. But hunger is a stronger master than faith. By the end of the night they had decided, if the girl would not leave, she must be forced out. Yet nothing in Ashford Hollow was ever so simple. When the men approached Edith's house the following evening, torches in hand, they found the windows shattered, the door torn from its hinges. Inside, Edith and her 6 children lay sprawled across the floorboards, their eyes gone, their lips chewed away, their bodies ragged with wounds that could never be mistaken for knives. And in the corner, crouched among the feathers and bones, was Miriam. She did not run. She did not cry. She only stood slowly, her pale dress streaked with blood, and lifted her hand. At once the crows came crashing through the broken roof, blackening the lantern light, their wings slapping the air into chaos. The men fled, their torches dropping to the ground, the barn erupting in fire as feathers caught flame. From the road, others watched as Edith's house burned, the crows circling above, in a great whirling funnel. And in the center of the inferno, they swore they saw the girl, untouched, unburned, her small figure framed in fire as the crows shrieked in a chorus that was almost human, almost words, almost laughter. From that night onward, Miriam was no longer one of them. She belonged not to Ashford Hollow, but to the black swarm that haunted it. She roamed freely through the streets, her feet bare against the frost, her eyes shining faintly in the moonlight. The villagers barred their homes, tighter, whispered prayers to locked doors, and yet no one dared strike at her again. Those who considered it found themselves visited in the dark, the sound of claws scratching their shutters until sleep fled them, until the fear curdled into madness, and slowly one by one the village thinned. Some died from hunger, others vanished into the woods, never to return. But most were found torn and scattered, in barns, in fields, in their own beds, their bones cracked open as though feasted upon by something more than birds. Each time a body was found, Miriam was near. A shadow at the road's end, or a pale face at a window, or a faint humming in the trees, always there, always feeding them. By winter, Ashford Hollow was no longer a village, but a graveyard, and the crows, fat and black, did not leave. That was when travelers began to speak of it. Merchants passing through the hills told of a place where the sky itself seemed to rot, where black wings blotted the sun and the air stank of decay, a place where bones littered the fields like crops, where no voice could rise above the endless chorus of caws. Some said they saw a girl there, pale as a ghost, scattering bones from her basket into the mud. Others claimed she looked no longer human at all, her body stretched thin, her eyes gleaming like obsidian stones. They called her the Crow Bride, though no one knew who, or what, she was promised to. But within Ashford Hollow itself, the Yasti, few who remained spoke little. Their voices were thin, their eyes hollow. They did not fight her anymore. They did not pray for salvation. They merely existed, waiting for their turn, waiting for the day the wings came scratching at their doors. And Miriam walked among them, humming her strange song, as though guiding her flock toward some final feast that none of them yet understood. For the crows were not simply birds, and the girl was not simply a girl. Something older stirred within the hollow, something deeper than hunger, darker than death. And as the winter winds howled through the broken rafters, the villagers realized what they had never dared to say aloud. The crows had not come to feed. They had come to bury, and Miriam was the one who fed them. The first snow of December fell upon Ashford Hollow like a burial shroud, soft and soundless. What had once been a lively farming village was now a hollowed carcass of its former self, each street littered with broken shutters, black feathers, and bones half buried beneath the frost. No smoke rose from chimneys, no laughter spilled from doorways. Only the endless rasp of caws echoed through the hills, a sound that now seemed less like birdsong and more like language, guttural, chanting, unearthly. It was said that those who still lived within the hollow could no longer distinguish their own thoughts from the whispering of wings. At night, when they closed their eyes, they did not dream of warmth or escape. They dreamed of beaks pecking into their skulls, tearing at their memories, leaving nothing but hollow silence where their minds once had been. And always, in the center of these dreams, was Miriam. The girl walked the streets as though they were her kingdom, the snow crunching beneath her bare feet without leaving prints. She carried her basket still, though its contents were no longer bread or scraps of meat. Now it was filled with bones, some small as a sparrow's, others unmistakably human. She scattered them along the road like seeds, humming her strange, tuneless melody. The crows swarmed after her, diving upon the bones, tearing the marrow from them with the frenzy of starving beasts. One man, desperate and trembling, once dared to call out to her. He begged her to stop, to leave them something, anything. He fell to his knees in the snow, hands clasped, his voice breaking. Miriam turned to him, her head tilting slightly, her eyes glinting with a depth that was no longer childlike. Then she spoke, or perhaps the crows spoke through her, for the sound came as a rasp, a chorus layered over her voice. They are not mine to stop. The man's body was found days later in the churchyard, stripped clean, his bones stacked neatly, into the shape of a cross. Travelers avoided Ashford Hollow by then. Even the bravest refused to pass through the valley, for they swore the birds followed them for miles, blotting the sky until they could no longer see the sun. Some said the air in the hollow stank of iron, as though the land itself had become a wound. Others claimed that the trees were beginning to die, their branches sagging with the weight of crows too heavy to lift. But a handful of strangers still came, drawn by rumor and superstition. Among them were two men, scholars from the East, fascinated by tales of the Crow Bride. They entered Ashford Hollow with notebooks in hand, determined to witness the phenomenon for themselves. The villagers watched them from behind cracked shutters, too afraid to speak, too weak to warn. The men set up camp in the abandoned schoolhouse, its windows shattered, its chalkboard still smeared with lessons left unfinished. At night, they lit candles and scribbled their observations as Miriam passed the road, followed by her black congregation. One recorded the rhythm of her humming, insisting it matched no song of the church but something older, something primal. The other sketched her form in the margins of his book, the pale face, the dark eyes, the way the birds bent toward her as though she were their son. On the third night, their notes ceased. When the villagers crept into the schoolhouse weeks later, they found the journals scattered across the floor, pages stained with black ink that ran like blood. On one page, half torn, only a single phrase remained legible. She is not feeding them, she is teaching them. Their bodies were never found. By January, the hollow was no longer a place of the living. Those who remained were husks, shuffling in silence, their eyes hollow, their mouths slack. Some swore Miriam had taken their voices. Others whispered that she had taken their souls. Whatever the truth, the people no longer resisted. They watched her scatter bones into the snow, and when the crows descended, they did not run. The girl was changing too. Her skin had grown almost translucent. Her hair darkened until it seemed the same sheen as the feathers that swarmed her. Her eyes no longer reflected the world. They absorbed it, black pools into which light itself vanished. And when she spread her arms wide in the snow, the crows mirrored her, their wings flaring in unison, a dark congregation ready for worship. One night the preacher, the last man in Ashford Hollow who still clung to prayer, stood on the church steps, clutching his Bible to his chest. His voice shook as he cried out into the night, demanding that Miriam reveal what she was, what she had brought upon them. She turned to him slowly, the wind scattering feathers around her like falling leaves, and then she smiled. Not a child's smile, but something far older, far sharper. They were here long before you. The crows erupted at once, filling the air with their chorus, so loud it rattled the windows and shook the earth beneath their feet. The preacher screamed scripture until his voice broke, but the words were swallowed, drowned beneath the tide of wings. When the morning came, the church was silent. Inside, his Bible lay torn to shreds, every page eaten through by Beaks. His body was never recovered. And so it was that Ashford Hollow became a monument of bones. The fields were buried beneath drifts of white feathers and shattered skulls. The trees sagged with nests of tangled sinew and hair. The river that once gave life to the village ran black with oil and rot, its surface broken only by drifting rib cages. And still Miriam walked, humming her song, scattering bones from her basket. Some say she waits there still, in the heart of Kentucky's forgotten hills, surrounded by her endless flock. That if you wander too close, you will hear the crows before you see them, a sound that fills the sky, that drowns your heartbeat, that makes your very thoughts crumble like old parchment. And when you see her, pale and smiling, her basket at her hip, you will know what the villagers of Ashford Hollow learned too late. She does not feed the crows, she feeds through them, and what they consume, they keep forever. The last winter in Ashford Hollow was not marked by time, but by silence. Days bled into nights, and nights bled into something darker still. By then, the village had ceased to resemble a place for human life. It had become a rotting stage upon which the crows performed their endless ritual. From the hills, outsiders claimed they could see the valley writhe like a black sea. Thousands, no, tens of thousands, of crows blanketed the rooftops, their weight collapsing shingles, snapping rafters. Fields that once yielded wheat now bristled with feathers instead of stalks, an ocean of shifting black that devoured every path. The air was never still. It pulsed with wings, heavy and constant, as though the sky itself had lowered to suffocate the earth. Those who lingered in the hollow no longer fought for survival. They sat quietly in their crumbling homes, eyes wide and empty, listening for Miriam's footsteps. Some left their doors open at night, as though inviting her in, and when she came, her small figure framed in the threshold, they did not scream or plead. They only nodded, resigned, as if recognizing something inevitable. When she entered, the crows followed. Those houses never stood long after. By morning, the walls had collapsed under the press of wings, beams snapping like twigs beneath the impossible weight. All that remained were mounds of feathers, piles of bones, and a silence so profound it carried its own gravity. By February, Ashford Hollow was gone, not abandoned, erased. Travelers who braved the valley swore there was no trace of the village at all. No cottages, no barns, no church spire, only mounds shaped like buildings, rising from the snow. But when the wind blew, the mounds scattered, revealed for what they were. Heaps of bones, stacked and fused together by time and talon. Whole families, whole histories, buried not in earth but in Beaks. At the center of it all stood Miriam. She no longer looked like a child. Her hair hung in a black veil to her waist, tangled with feathers. Her skin gleamed pale as frost, yet her eyes glowed faintly, twin voids lit from within. Her basket, once carried by hand, now hovered at her side as though lifted by invisible wings. And when she sang, the crows did not merely follow. They moved as one body, a living tide that rippled to her every note. An eyewitness, a trapper who claimed to have wandered too near, described what he saw before fleeing into the woods. He spoke of Miriam raising her arms wide as the entire murder of crows ascended in a single thunderous motion, blotting the moon. And then, slowly, they descended upon the village, not as birds but as a single writhing shape. A beast made of wings and bone, consuming everything beneath it. When dawn came, Ashford Hollow was gone, reduced to a valley of bleached skeletons and feathers drifting like snow. The trapper swore he saw Miriam walking across the valley floor, untouched, her basket swinging at her side. She paused at the riverbank, leaned down and whispered something into the water. The current darkened as though ink had bled into it, and when the trapper looked again, she was gone, swallowed by the black reflection of the river. He never returned to Kentucky, but he left a single line scrawled in his journal before vanishing into obscurity. She was not feeding the crows, she was preparing the world for them. From that winter forward, the hollow was avoided by all. Maps were redrawn, roads rerouted, and families forbidden to speak of the lost village. Yet hunters still reported seeing crows circling the valley long after, far too many for any natural flock. Some swore that when the wind howled through the trees, it carried with it a child's song, tuneless and thin, and if you listened too closely, you could almost hear the words behind it. Ashford Hollow was not destroyed. It was buried in Beaks, buried in bones. Not everyone perished in Ashford Hollow. A handful escaped, if you could call it that. One fled across the ridge on the very night Miriam vanished into the river. Another staggered through the woods weeks later, clothes shredded, his eyes glazed, as though he had forgotten how to blink. Each carried with them no possessions, no food, not even the instinct to look back. They simply moved, hollow and trembling, as if guided by some faint signal to flee. When these survivors reached neighboring towns, their stories made little sense. Some muttered that Miriam had grown wings. Others insisted that she no longer walked at all but floated, her feet never touching the ground. One claimed she had become something larger than human, a shape in the sky that looked like a child only from far away, and something much, much older when you drew near. But in one detail, they all agreed. The crows had spoken with her voice. Farmers laughed at the tales at first. Children, they said, invent monsters to explain tragedy. A village consumed by birds? Impossible. But the survivors were not children. They were men and women who had once built barns, tilled fields, raised families, and now their voices shook, their hands clawed at the air as though still brushing away wings. Some refused to speak altogether. They sat in taverns staring into their cups until the ale went flat, lips pressed shut, as though words themselves had become dangerous. A few tried to write what they saw, but the papers they left behind were filled not with sentences but spirals, thousands of them, dark ink circles that spun tighter and tighter until the page tore through. It was the children who understood first. Not Miriam's peers, she had none left, but the sons and daughters of those who escaped. They woke at night screaming, claiming that the girl in the hollow was still calling them, that she stood at the window with her basket of grain, offering it in outstretched hands. The parents barred shutters, burned feathers found on the threshold, whispered prayers too hurried to finish, but the children still cried. And then the birds began to follow them. It started small, a single crow perched on the roof of a distant barn, watching. Then two, then a dozen. Flocks gathered at dusk, silent, unblinking. When villagers threw stones or fired rifles, the birds scattered, but returned the next day, twice as many, lining the fences like soldiers waiting for orders. Whispers spread that Miriam's work was not finished. She had not merely buried her village. She had planted something, seeded the land with death that would spread beyond Ashford Hollow, and those who had escaped her song carried it with them. The survivors never returned to their homes. They lived on the edges of towns, restless, haunted, never sleeping through a night. Some swore they heard wings when no birds flew overhead, the faint rustle of feathers in the rafters, and a girl's voice humming just beneath their dreams. Ashford Hollow had been devoured, but Miriam's reach was not bound to the valley. It was following them. More than half a century after Ashford Hollow vanished, the valley remained untouched, its very existence struck from county records. It became a blank spot on the map, an omission no one cared to correct. But in 1903, railroad surveyors stumbled upon the site while charting a new line. What they found was not soil or stone, it was bone. The men reported that the earth gave a hollow sound when struck, as though the valley floor was nothing but a thin crust over something deeper. They dug, expecting roots, clay, or limestone, but unearthed femurs, ribs, and skulls stacked so densely that they formed a kind of foundation. It was not burial in any sacred sense. It was disposal, a grotesque layering of human remains pressed together by weight and time. The strangest part was the condition of the bones. None were gnawed, broken, or weathered. Everyone was clean, stripped to ivory perfection, as if the flesh had dissolved rather than decayed. The surveyors fled, swearing never to return. The project was abandoned, the plans quietly burned. Decades later, in the 1940s, an archivist at the Kentucky Historical Society uncovered a misfiled journal. It belonged to a county official who had been dispatched to investigate the hollow after its disappearance. The entries began logically enough. Lists of names, descriptions of abandoned roads, weather patterns. But the last pages descended into frantic scrawl. He wrote of a girl with hair black as ink who stood at the river's edge, her reflection speaking words her mouth did not. He claimed the birds no longer behaved like animals but like extensions of her will. And then a final line. She did not feed them, she became them. The archivist, shaken, sealed the file under restricted access. For years it gathered dust until one day it vanished. To this day, no one admits to knowing where it went. But rumors persisted. Families along the Ohio River reported flocks of crows arriving without warning, thousands at once, blackening the sky at midday. Their fields remained untouched by pests, but not by silence. Children vanished. Houses collapsed under the weight of birds that never flew away, and in each town, witnesses whispered the same thing. Among the crows was always a single figure, small and pale, with a basket clutched to her chest. Some claimed she was the last, memory of Ashford Hollow, cursed to walk the earth as a ghost child. Others believed she had grown into something far greater, a harbinger of hunger, using the crows as her teeth. But those who dare to repeat the story aloud call her by one name, a name scratched in fading ink on the back of the archivist's final note, the girl who fed the crows. And they say if you wander too close to the valley today, where trees grow twisted from the soil of bones, the air thick with the sound of wings, you may hear her song, and if you hear it, even faintly, it is already too late.